Kate and Christy. That was a great transition. Meg, next slide, please. Okay. So we kind of talked about the steps, the why you might need special education services. So from this point on for the knowledge burst really are kind of coming from the point of your child has been evaluated by the school district and they are saying that yes, you qualify for services and we're developing an IEP or individualized education program or plan. Kind of those words are used interchangeable. Really, the key word there is individualized. While you're working through a plan, and it should really be tailored to your child specifically. Each child is different, has different strengths, different challenges, and really this plan is tailored towards each individual child to make with the goal for them to be successful in the classroom. The IEP is a legal document that's covered under the federal law IDEA. The IDEA is the Individual with Disabilities Acts. And that law states that students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education and that they have the right to an education which takes place in the least restrictive environment. This is something that my family always references when we go into our IEP meetings, is just saying like, hey, we want my son learns a lot from his peers. So something that we push for is socially to have him in a general education or pull out resource class with some other kids that he can learn from as well. So this is something that I often write in my IEPs is just say, hey, he has the right to an education in the least restrictive environment, and that is X, Y, and Z. And then just in general, the intent of the IEP is to set learning goals, state the services that the school provide, and then specify which accommodations and modifications are needed for that student to make progress. And later in the slides, I'll go over kind of the difference between an accommodation versus modification. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is contained in the IEP? It's really four main areas. First is your current performance. Where is your child at academically, socially? How do they communicate? And just what, where are they at as a child themselves? What motivates them? Where do they? What are some challenges? What are some areas where they're really successful? And then from there, we want to look to establish meaningful and measurable goals. And these are both goals that are academic and functional, and that they monitor and track progress. It also included in this is recommended supports and services. Does your child need an aide or a registered behavior technician to be with them to be successful in the classroom? Do they qualify for services such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy? Do they need transportation to and from school each day, etc.? So what does your child need to be successful in the classroom? And then the last thing, as you kind of get into middle school and high school, it's starting to plan for those transition services. They begin at age 14, and it's really planning into adulthood. What is the vision? What are the next steps you see for your child? Okay, so kind of went over that quick overview of the plan, but what is your role as a parent? So as a parent and or guardian, you are critical member of this IEP team. Without your input, knowledge, support, this does not work at all. You know your child best. You know what motivates them. You know where they might be struggling. You just know your child and can tell right away what is going to work or not going to work for them. And then the other thing, which is so important, is you share your vision for your child. Where do you want them to be? What do you see as, especially in transition, right? As they approach adulthood, what do you see? What is that life that you see for your child? And then again, you also you have the right to share your concerns, your strategies, and your ideas. So at school, your child might, for instance, go back to the case, might really be struggling socially, but that might not be a concern that you see at home, or vice versa. So kind of, again, you really want to talk about that home component and really be as transparent as possible, because the teachers and the child study team only see the child that goes into the school each day. They don't necessarily see what you're seeing at home each day. And then the big thing is just advocating for your child's needs. You want to make sure that they're getting the supports, the services that they need to be successful in the classroom. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how do you advocate effectively? Um, this is one of those things where I think it can be so overwhelming, because we talk about like advocacy and what does that mean? But really, it's just, at the end of the day, is being a voice for your child. Um, your child might not be able to speak for themselves, and you're really there to kind of just be there for them and speak for them in this, in this case, for their educational, um, for educational support. So how do you do this effectively? Um, I think at the end of the day, again, you know your child best, but the biggest things are come prepared and be prepared to be an active participant. Sometimes you go into an IEP meeting and it can be very overwhelming, and you feel like everyone's talking at you, but no one's listening to you. So how do you make sure that you are um, able to be heard, and um, your expertise on your child is valued? So you really want to come prepared. One thing that my husband and I like to do is we will put together what we call parent input. So a couple weeks before the IEP meeting, I kind of think about my son in a couple different areas. I think of, say, this is a transition from one grade to the other. I like to reflect back and say, hey, what's working this year? Where have we seen success? And I want to start with something positive, right? These are the successes we've seen for my child in the classroom. And then second piece would be, what are some areas of challenge? And ideally, I like to speak to in that piece of anything where there's a challenges is how can we use those areas where he is strong in those challenging areas? And then also, like, what am I recommending for his placement, his supports, etc. So that's the third piece of that. And then the fourth piece would be really like, how do we plan for the following year? What additional things that are not in place now do we need? And I like to just take a Word document, write that all out, and have a printout with me at the meeting that I can reference, because it is a very overwhelming environment. You're in this meeting with your child, and not to anyone's fault, but it's very deficit focused, because the goal is to get your child the supports and services that they need to be successful in that classroom. But it can be really overwhelming, because you're sitting at the other side and you're like, oh, my son is so wonderful and great, and they're not seeing it, and all they're worried about is that his reading comprehension is at second grade and it should be at fifth grade, or vice versa, so really just kind of having that mindset, and not be that it is the goal of the meeting, though it can be heavy focused on deficits, is to get your child the supports to be successful in that classroom. And I think when you can kind of wrap your head around that, and also be there and kind of offer strategies, it helps a lot. At the end of the day, it's still a very overwhelming process. And I know when I get out of a meeting, I need to go for a walk, call a friend to vent, etc. Like I want a break. And I think that's completely normal. But just try to think of it, makes it a little bit easier, is just that the process is there to support your child, and you are a very important voice at that process, in that process as well. And then the other thing too is, because it's so overwhelming, look to utilize outside support if you need it. If you and if you are a single parent, or if you're the only guardian, or you and your partner feel like you just can't do this alone, you can look to bring an advocate into meetings with you. You can look to bring another parent with experience. There's a couple different options, and you can always bring someone into the meeting with you. I know when my son was younger, we would often bring our BCBA. She was a part of our family. She knew us well from the time he was in preschool till third or fourth grade, and she was just someone that knew him and could help us kind of be another support person in these meetings as well. And then the other thing is, sometimes you're not going to find consensus, right? Sometimes you're going to think that your child needs speech services, say, and the child study team is going to say, nope, he or she doesn't qualify based on X, Y, or Z. And you can elevate those issues when they can't be resolved. So you can always request mediation or a due process hearing if needed. And then just the other thing at the end of the day is you want to document everything. Anything that you had in a discussion, per our discussion on XYZ date, we agreed to the following 3 items. Thank you. Send and document that via email, but kind of always keep that documentation, because if something doesn't get done the right way, you can always bring that and say, hey, we agreed to this. Remember our meeting last week, etc. All right, next slide. Okay. Before I go to this, I do see there's a couple questions on here. Just trying to walk through them. So I just see one that says you don't have to sign anything in the meeting. That is very true. I will say you have 14 days to either have, if you don't sign it within 14 days or schedule another meeting, it does go in place. So no, you don't have to sign it, but if there's no action within 2 weeks, that IEP does go in place. And I don't know the rest of the team. Is there other questions on here before I move forward?
I think we've been kind of trying to address them as they come up, so you don't have to do double duty.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Okay, so next slide I'll go into is accommodations versus modifications. So IEPs usually typically contain both, but they are different. So thinking of an accommodation, it really impacts how a student learns, and a modification impacts what the student learns. So an accommodation will provide support without altering the goal. My child can sit in math class, but he needs access to a fidget in order to get through the talking piece of that. So, right, is an example of an accommodation. A modification example would be my child is in the math class and he requires division problems be they're a little bit more challenging for him. So instead of doing 10 on a homework each night, he's going to have 5 problems to do. So that's kind of just the difference thinking of that. Next slide, I'll go over a couple more examples. Okay, so again, accommodations, visual schedules, graphic organizers, technology assessments. This is a big thing that you can ask for in an IEP meeting or even outside through the child study team. So we talked about earlier in our case, a child that had some learning challenges. So in that case, another recommendation might be that we want to ask for a technology assessment. And what a technology assessment is a third party comes in and looks at the way they learn and makes observations and then recommendations based on that. So would it be helpful for, I have a child who struggles with reading a lot of reading paragraphs and retaining that information. Would it make more sense for me to have a talk to text feature on their Chromebook so they're able to access that technology a little bit differently? So that's just one example, but that is definitely something you can ask for in a meeting as well. And then breaks is another big thing, right? Your child has a hard time sitting still for 30 minutes through a lesson. Okay, well, after 10 minutes, he or she is allowed to take a lap around the classroom, or jump in on the trampoline in the back of the classroom for 2 minutes, whatever that looks like. But kind of thinking of how you add different breaks into their day. And then small group instruction. So we talked about the little girl again in the example, being in a large classroom, right? If think of kindergarten, it's probably noisy. There's 25 kids. So would that child benefit from smaller group instruction in an area like ELA or math, or just overall in general throughout the day? Another accommodation is extended times for test assignments. Does that child need breaks during the test? And so again, we need to give them a little bit extra time to complete it, so it's not overwhelming. And then another last accommodation would be preferred seating. So is my child going to be more attentive if they're in the front of the room, vice being in the back of the room? And then on the other side is modifications. Talked a little bit before, test assignments with fewer questions. Another big thing is alternative projects or homework. I have a 5th grader, and he is reading on a 2nd grade level. He might be given a different book to do a book report on than his peers. But in that ELA environment, we're learning about how to do a book report. It's not as much the topic of the book that's the subject area we're learning about. It's more how do we read a book and then summarize it in a book report fashion. So again, he's meeting that overall goal, but doing it in an alternative way. Same thing, adjusted curriculum, adjusted grading scales, use of a calculator in math. If you think of like multi-step programs, having access to multi-step problems, having access to a calculator can be really helpful. Again, alternative books and text, and then even providing a word bank on a test. They have a social studies test, heavy vocabulary, written into the IEP can say during these vocab type tests, I want my child to have access to a word bank to help him or her show that they are comprehending the information, but in a way that is more, that is modified to their learning. Okay. All right. Other considerations. So there is a lot of opinions on this first one, and I will tell you, I myself personally have changed in the last couple years. But invite your child to participate at the IEP meeting. Before I was like, why would I do that? Like, again, it's very negatively based, and I don't want my child to hear their challenges. But recently I have the privilege of knowing a couple adult advocates themselves, and they have kind of changed my vision and my thoughts there, and saying like, no, I'm the student, and I want to know the classroom that they're going to put me in. I want to be able to say for myself, like, hey, this is where I learn the best, or I really want to be with this peer, or my vision for myself is to be a accountant, and so math is really important to me, or whatever that is. But just having them have a seat at the table, and it doesn't have to. It can look different for each child. I know. So my son is in 6th grade. We started bringing him in 4th grade, and what he does is he comes down and we say, "Hey, Tom, everybody on this team. We're going to kind of go around the room. We're going to talk about school for you for next year. What are I say, hey, what are 3 things that you really liked about school this year?" And he kind of tells them that. Or what are 3 things you want to change for school next year, or keep the same, whatever that is. And then 5 minutes later, he leaves that classroom. Leaves the meeting and goes back to the classroom. So just so he kind of understands a little bit of, because he's going to have to advocate for himself someday too, right? So you just want to have exposure to this process early, in a meaningful way that it doesn't, with the goal not to, with the goal being to build him up, not put him down in any way, but just to kind of have exposure, like, hey, this is what we're planning for next year. And again, everyone's different. What works for one person might not work for another. But I think it's just something to definitely consider if you want your child to participate in the meetings. And then other big thing is leverage your child's strengths when developing the IEP. How can they help my child navigate the school day? I have a son that loves trains. So early on, we had visual schedules, they had trains on them. Now he takes his scheduled breaks during the day. He gets to draw trains in his notebook. So what are some things that your child really enjoys, and how can we add them to a school day to make something that might be a little bit challenging a little bit easier for them, ease that anxiety around a subject area or a part of the day that might be a little bit harder for them. And then the other big thing is think outside the box. If something is being offered that's not working, try to collaborate with the team on a creative solution to come up with something that might, right? Often there are two lanes that we go in when we go into these meetings. It's, hey, your child is going to go into a self-contained class, or your child's going to go into gen ed with little support, right? But those two are not the only answers. Just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. And I think if you're willing to work with the team and come up with ideas, most of the time you will be heard. It's not going to work all the time, but just kind of, hey, if you don't like the solutions that are being offered to you, let's try to come up with a third one. Next thing is really referencing documentation, data, and examples when advocating for supports and services. I think to my experience with my own child is he had an aide at school, a para. She was wonderful, but he had a lot of big challenges with keeping his body in the classroom, right? He was an eloper. He wanted to be in the sensory room. He didn't want to sit in the classroom. So he really needed someone that behaviorally could anticipate what his next move was going to be. So we went and we brought a lot of documentation from our BCBA. We talked to the teacher about her experience with him and where he was having challenges, and really advocated for a RBT support rather than a regular para, because that was someone that could kind of just, again, make that classroom a little bit easier to navigate for my son. Took a lot of back and forth, a lot of examples, but again, anytime you can reference documentation and data or real life examples, I think that goes a long way to help get you those supports and services that you're looking for. And then last one, and I do think this is one of the most important things and something that I know we overlooked early on, is you want to think of your child's social goals when developing the IEP and ensure that they are addressed and prioritized as well. A big part of school isn't just academics, it's getting the opportunities to interact with your peers and grow those social relationships. So kind of thinking about what are those activities that my child really enjoys, and how can I work with this team to make them accessible for my child to participate in, whether that be drama or basketball, soccer, band. How can we choir, even, like, what are socially, how can we get him social supports to really help him in the school environment socially. All right, next slide. Okay, and the last thing is just executing the plan. So the IEP plan is only as good as the execution that you do towards it, right? So you want to make sure that everyone's executing the plan successfully. So one of the biggest things is you want to come up with a communication plan to monitor progress. How often are you communicating with the school? Who at the school you'd be communicating with? And establish that in the IEP meeting, and then also follow up in the next school year when you have like the new teacher, et cetera. And then another thing is provide a student 101. There's just a quick visual next to it, kind of an all about me. Picture your child, their name, their age, strengths, weaknesses, what works for me, where what do I love to do, kind of provide that to the team to help them execute the year with your child. Another big thing is getting involved in your school district CPAG. CPAG is Special Education Parent Advisory Group. I know in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, those are mandatory to have. It's a great way to connect to other parents who are navigating special education. Other big thing is get involved in the classroom. You want to really develop a rapport with your child's teacher and the support team. And if you work together to best support your child, everyone wins. It's easier for everybody to kind of get through that school year. Last two things, go with your gut. If something doesn't seem right, please speak up. Again, you know your child best. You are the expert on them. Sorry, that was a lot of talking.
We do have a few minutes for questions. I know we're kind of right at time, but and people have been asking questions, and we've been trying to address questions and comments in the chat. But if anyone, I know sometimes you're listening and you're taking notes. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to either raise their hand and unmute, or we can continue to field questions in the chat. While folks are thinking, maybe Meg, we can pull up the next slide or two and even pull up the poll in case people do have to hop off a little early. There's a question about slides. So what we send out is a recording of the presentation. So you'll be able to see a video with the slides and also get to hear Monica's explanation of what's in them. And I see the poll has popped up for me. So if folks aren't seeing that, please click that little poll button so that you can give us feedback and tell us what you'd like to hear about in future sessions. And then keep an eye out for that email. There's a question here, Monica. What if you request an aid or support and the team denies it?
So that is definitely where we started on our journey as well. And I think, again, it's getting that documented information. Another big thing that I know I did early on was I